Good morning, I'm Jennifer Walker with WaterEarth. My talk today is on low-impact development case studies for resiliency within school projects. So it's very specific. My company, WaterEarth, is a water resources firm. We work in a broad range of water resources, including low-impact development is one of our specialty items. These 3 case studies all happen to be located in Southern California. It's coincidental. It wasn't intended to be geographically focused, but the school projects that we had for case studies were located there. If you're in a much different climate, still feel free to ask questions. 2 of these 3 projects were grant funded projects. We've done more than a dozen in the past few years, and we also have experience with LID projects from arid to Mediterranean climates to very wet climates like the Gulf Coast. And somebody mentioned wanting to get copies of presentations. My cards are in back. Feel free to grab one. But even better if you give me your card or leave it in back. I'll make sure to get you a copy later this week or next. So our case studies, I'm going to focus more on the Nuview 100% stormwater infiltration project and go into more detail on that. I'm also going to talk about a Fontana USD project that was focused on both LID and water conservation. It has about 30 LID features as well as turf replacement scattered throughout 3 campuses. And then finally, it's not really an elementary school or high school like the other 2, but it is a medical center campus with medical school facilities. So it's an EIR from a master plan, and we looked at the LID components of that as well. So we'll touch on all 3. Just a few acknowledgements. 2 of the 3 projects were grant funded by the California State Water Resources Control Board, and we had lots of teaming partners on all of the projects. We love collaborating on interesting and challenging projects, especially those that make a difference to the community, ecology, and infrastructure. Common challenges with the school projects. All projects have their own challenges, but the ones that are school related, that are grant funded, tend to have compressed, at least in our experience, compressed schedules. For example, on the first one, Nuview, probably should have been about a 6-month design. We completed it in 3 months. The schedule challenges are related to grant compliance, but also trying to take facilities out of service when it's not too disruptive to student or teacher or parent pickup needs. So it's kind of focusing on, can you do the construction in the summer, which also helps from a stormwater quality compliance since Southern California rarely gets rain in the summer, and also potentially over the holidays as well. So there's also always visibility, safety concerns, and all that. But when you're dealing with elementary kids, additional factors come into play. And then coincidentally, both school projects also had solar arrays going into portions of the parking lot. The first one was a little bit, more collaborative because our partner, Chevron Energy Solutions at the time, now NG Energy, was handling oversight of both the LID and the solar. So it was a little easier to coordinate on getting the grades set appropriately and making sure we didn't have infiltration right around the columns. The second one with Fontana, it was handled separate grant, totally different contractor. So that was more challenging in terms of making sure we didn't impact areas with solar arrays. So the first project, Nuview, again, 100% stormwater infiltration. That was the goal of the project. It was doable because of the sandy soils and also the relatively low annual rainfall and relatively low 100-year events. Additionally, all of the runoff needed to be drained through LID features, so we'd have the cleaning element, but also really we're removing pollutants from the receiving system by simply not discharging any water. On that project, there was also some existing structural flooding of a building because of the way the existing parking lot was drained. and I guess lack of storm drain infrastructure. The inlet was kind of sited in a really weird spot, so you'd basically have sheet flow jumping the curb and going into the building. So a lot of these projects start from the grant phase and they go all the way through construction phase. Many of the elements are common to typical LID projects. The O&M plan is really important to make sure that they maintain these long term. And then usually there's an interpretive signage component due to grant requirements for public outreach or just for incorporating an education with the school curriculum. In some cases, the teachers are specifically required to incorporate the LID facility into their science-based curriculum. So our LID features, basically it was a parking lot replacement project. So porous asphalt dominated, but we did not replace the entire parking lot with porous asphalt. Some was able to stay conventional asphalt and still drain to the porous areas and meet the compliance goals. We had some challenges with really open fields, lots of blowing dust, so long-term maintenance is super critical. We also tried to put in a few elements like asphalt berms, slightly elevate some vegetation on a berm to further block dust. But the long-term maintenance is going to be really key on that. And then any overflow from the parking lot, if there happened to be any for an excessive event, would be directed onto a play field so that it could infiltrate, resulting in really no discharge ever. So it's very rural. It's in Riverside County in a little town called Nuview. You can see it's really surrounded by agriculture and open fields. There's a floodplain nearby, but not within the site. But as we all know, that doesn't mean that a property won't flood. One of our offices is in Houston. None of our staff flooded, but a lot of people within the city flooded that weren't in a mapped floodplain. So it basically just communicates risk. But in this case, there was structural flooding on the site, again, due to the storm drain infrastructure within the site. So we were able to solve that with the LID project. So pretty flat within the site, but there's a lot of topographic relief as you get a little away from the site and start getting into the hillier, more mountainous terrain. So a 1.7 acre parking lot. So our 100-year, 24-hour event is 5.4 inches. Annual rainfall about 12 inches. Our saturated hydraulic conductivity, which is the primary factor influencing infiltration, pretty good at 1.2 inches per hour. And here's our school site. Prior to construction, the parking lot was really failing and kind of a mess. And I believe that they basically came upon this idea of doing LID and getting a grant as a way to fund renovation of their parking lot, which was well past the end of its life and not really well thought out as far as traffic flow patterns. So lots of issues in terms of parents picking up kids and just not enough space and not a good flow. So from the grant assistance phase, there's preliminary work done just to look at what's possible with the site. And we came up with the concept of porous asphalt, primarily shown in the blue areas within the parking stalls and driving lanes within the stalls, but keeping the fire lane with conventional asphalt. Because of the bus and the maintenance traffic, it just would have required more like deeper depths and a little bit more structural stability to handle that traffic. So since it wasn't necessary from a stormwater perspective, we just allowed that to drain by sheet flow. And then the white items, ideally those would have been bioretention, but the maintenance folks did not want bioretention. They didn't want the plants, they didn't want the maintenance, so they became infiltration trenches. We were able to convince them that it would be good to have some plants at least along the edge of the site. But we also got into, we had to look at tree canopy sizes and make sure it wasn't too close to solar arrays and that type of thing. So the overflow directed kind of to the north here and then west onto a play field, again, if there is any overflow. Here's an outlet to an existing infiltration basin already in place on the site. Totally side note, but you can see there's erosion occurring at the outlet from the concrete conveyance path. So ideally that design would have incorporated in more erosion control. It's really important, especially at the transition of materials. I'm kind of keying in on this because we're working on an expert witness case right now in West Texas that's kind of a massive detention basin failure with like $750,000 in damages, and it's all like erosion and too much water, transition of materials issue kind of thing. And here's our play field that would take a little bit of overflow, like in a 100-year plus event. So our modeling looked at design storm events ranging from the 2-year to the 100-year, as well as longer-term continuous simulation modeling for almost a 40-year period of record. And so we used the nearest gauges for rainfall and evapotranspiration or evaporation to be able to consider that. So we used the SWIM model, and we basically considered rainfall, runoff that would occur into the LID features, and then within the features, although there really wasn't any plants in the LID features in this case, considering surface storage and then infiltration and percolation through the layers and into the underlying soil. This graphic shows an underdrain, which we would incorporate in type C or D, more clayish soils, low infiltration rates, not required in this case. So I won't go into details on the design storm table. If you are interested in this, again, leave me your card and I'll send you a copy of the slides. But basically, in the 100-year event, we showed like 1 CFS of discharge. These are teeny tiny little hydrographs. So there is a little bit that would trickle off of the site into the play field for infiltration. The other events, the 10-year event, completely no discharge at all from the parking lot. And then even the 100-year 24-hour event, just slightly over a CFS. Looking at the porous asphalt, these are actually hydrographs going through the porous asphalt system. So it's, if you think of the surface layer of the pavement is maybe about 3 inches, and then the rocks below it about 6 inches. The water within the rock layer got up to about 3.5 inches deep in these modeled 100-year events. So that's fine. We expect it to store a little bit and then drain out, but we always look at, we don't want the water going in and then coming back up through the pavement. So the continuous simulation model is also important to look at and make sure that that's not happening and the system continues to function even with back-to-back events. From the continuous simulation model, these are the days of historic precipitation. So even though it doesn't rain a lot in a 40-year period, there were a number of days with rain. And then these are days that runoff would occur from the parking lot within that simulation. The highest value that we see is just over 0.5 CFS. The lowest value, ranging down to like 0. So again, the discharge from the parking lot would overflow onto the playfield and then infiltrate. But pretty minimal discharge from the parking lot at all. So we see total annual events, if we average the rainfall events over the course of the record, about 32 greater than 0.1 inches on average in a given year. The runoff from the site, zero events from the site as a whole producing runoff. And this just looks specifically and breaks it down between the parking lot, the playfield, and the site. So again, there might be a little trickle of runoff from the parking lot that would go into the playfield and infiltrate. But it's not something that would keep the playfield out of service because, again, that overflow would only occur in larger events. So the civil design, again, I mentioned this was really the trickiest part of the project because of the need to match. Basically, it was super price sensitive. We went through a round of value engineering and came in with, I guess, I don't want to say less robust, but I guess less extensive LID design, where we took our rock layer and shrunk it. We did some other things, kind of intensive design and modeling wise, and then they rebid it and only saved like $10,000. So I'm not saying to not value engineer, and it still performed okay, but we removed some of the factor of safety for what I feel like was not a substantial cost savings. But again, because of the cost sensitive nature of it, all of the existing grades around the site with existing sidewalks had to be met or matched. So it was really challenging to get it to grade, to get it to drain, so that everything drained to the LID feature, and then also that we met ADA compliance. That was really the most challenging part, was the grading. The modeling was interesting, and we were able to show pretty readily that we met the infiltration goals. And as I mentioned earlier, we did, I guess, work in a couple of mechanical elements to try to block some dust. But everybody went into this knowing that there was going to be, potentially a heavy dust load, and that was going to require maintenance. So here's the solar arrays on the finished site. You can see a berm constructed out of asphalt, and that's just intended to, the buses park in an area that's unpaved. That's just trying to prevent some blowing dust from coming into the site from the unpaved area. Normally in infiltration trenches or basins, we might think of using, certain pretty stones or a certain size stone. In this case, facilities was really clear that they wanted specific size stones because they didn't want the kids to throw them. Hopefully the kids weren't strong enough to pick up these rocks, because somebody would have been majorly hurt. But so the size of the rocks was pretty substantial. The one construction issue that I wasn't crazy about is we didn't do the construction inspection. The construction phase services were handled by someone else, and they just didn't catch that the rocks were supposed to be depressed within the infiltration basin so that you had a surface storage layer. The project still meets the intent of the stormwater infiltration, but it's just without having that little bit of surface storage. Again, probably lost a little bit of safety factor within it. But the soils are good enough that it's, the performance still should be okay. So again, the drive lane, the entry driveway, and the fire lane around conventional asphalt, and then the parking stalls and lanes between the stalls, porous asphalt. Now, would something else have been prettier, or a lighter color worked better for urban heat island effect? Absolutely, but a lot of times in terms of economics, people end up choosing more of the porous asphalt. So the landscape design was fairly limited on this particular project, and we really tried to focus in on plants that do well within, parking lot medians within the road right-of-way. And then we were constrained on trees of not providing a very large tree because of potential for it to either shade or broken limbs to interact with the solar arrays. They were pretty particular about that, and the distance requirement was quite large. But even though it's Southern California, it's kind of a microclimate where it can get very cold and windy at night. So that was also a consideration. I've mentioned visibility and site requirements. They also wanted to preserve some existing olive trees and use the existing irrigation system, which meant we had to be very specific on the plans about the contractor, maintaining that system in the current condition and or replacing it if it was damaged. So here's right after they were planted. The mature trees are obviously the olive trees. There's Little John bottlebrush trees, which are like, I think, a South African native that are drought tolerant, low water use. In there, stacked with some lavender lantana and also rosemary to try to provide a little bit of stacking to block dust, and slight little elevation on the berm. Also used some western redbuds, which we kind of had to twist their arm to use, but I was happy that they agreed. So interpretive signs, again, I mentioned pretty critical element on these grant projects for compliance, and then also to educate the kids and to use as part of the curriculum. Shredded mulch in here, again, very specific within the LID features that the growing media, the compost, the mulch product used in design and in maintenance be free of like animal manure or other products that would tend to leach nutrients, since these are intended to be, bless you, water quality features. So I won't go into a lot of detail on the water quality. It's intended to improve the water quality on some 303D listed water bodies, Canyon Lake and Lake Elsinore. But really, even though the LID features are great for pollutant removal, we really improve conditions by not discharging water. So that's the primary method of pollutant removal. Typically, you'd have TSS, you'd have heavy metals, oil and grease, bacteria and so forth, and all of this was eliminated from discharge from the site. So there I am standing next to some oil and grease. So here's our curb cut into the infiltration basin. Again, that should all have been depressed, and that was an issue that should be caught during construction inspection. This is part of our water quality management plan. We're also addressing hydro modification simply by handling those range of events from the 2-year to the 10-year and up to the 100-year. The monitoring plan, which was required by the grant, basically we recommended visual monitoring to assess whether or not runoff was occurring, and we looked at number of events per year, when it would be constructed, and what would be doable. So 1 year of monitoring is what was required by the grant. So we had specific monitoring locations where there would be or could be discharge based on the grading, specifically from the infiltration trenches, and then also overflow from the site. The grant projects also require a project assessment and evaluation plan. You can't read this right here, but it basically says, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it, this is how we're going to measure it and prove that we did it so that we meet the intent of the grant. And then the maintenance plan. So we kind of have an overview, and then we have fact sheets of what needs to be done and checklists that need to be filled out, showing the inspection that was performed and the activity or maintenance that was done at the same time. And then because people lose their O&M manuals or staff turns over, one of our particular interpretive signs has a little snapshot of maintenance that needs to be done. So hopefully if future employees read the sign, that will help key them in on, oh hey, we really need to be maintaining this if there's a lack of or loss of consistency. So again, these signs are really geared towards the elementary age students, but with enough information that their parents or adults can learn a little bit as well. So I mentioned some of the challenges that we face in these projects, being fast-paced, as well as trying to key in and coordinate with solar providers at the same time. But construction inspection is really important and key. Just want to touch on briefly a project with Fontana School District. It's also a grant-funded project, but focused on LID and water conservation under the DROPS grant. So it's 3 different school sites, also pretty sandy soil, but basically looked at draining portions of existing sites into retrofitted LID features. And we found that the grant required infiltration of the 85th percentile event. In most cases, we were able to infiltrate the 100-year event, not from the entire school, but from the contributing drainage area. Sometimes we were able to make the LID feature a little bit bigger to do that. Sometimes it just naturally did that. And we had very specific grant items related to the square footage of the LID that was being provided, as well as the drainage area being served. So one of the challenges on this project was really accounting for all of that, and some back and forth on decisions with the school district of what would really meet their needs. Could they lose these palm trees? Did this planter box need to stay? And so forth. And then too, making sure, we weren't taking away play area from the kids. What are the existing walking paths and all that good stuff. So pretty developed campus is where all of the retrofits took place. There were a couple areas with turf replacement that were just in open areas, but most of the retrofits were within parking lots or courtyards, consisting of primarily bioretention with some porous pavement. So very highly constrained site, really needing to look at if there was an overflow, then we need to tie into an existing storm drain, inlet, or infrastructure. If there's not an overflow in the 100-year event, it doesn't mean that we couldn't have a 500-year event, and where is that water going to go? Is there a clear sheet flow path, or do we need to tie into a storm drain system to make sure there's no flooding of adjacent structures? So again, very detailed modeling in the EPA SWIM model. This just looks at the levels as they're rising and falling in one bioretention area. But we had hydrographs for each of the areas, and then also looked at runoff as a whole. So again, interpretive signage geared at either elementary or high school level or middle school students based on the specific campus. And then I want to just touch briefly on the a medical center master plan project that was based on an EIR. So it's like an 84-acre site. We're actually working on a very similar one that's 200 and some acres with LA County right now as a sub to ICF consultants, basically looking at the water resources, water supply, hydrology, water quality. In this case, the soil's not great infiltration. But we looked at the features that were proposed in the master plan as LID features, and we basically modeled them to see, will it work to show that there's no impact or no significant hydrology impact or water quality impact. One of the sites also ended up including an SB 610 like water supply assessment, where you look very detailed at the fixtures and the outdoor use and the plants and the irrigation, and you know what can we do to conserve and also comply with the requirements of the bill. So for the 84-acre site, there's the blue and the green areas are areas being proposed either for porous pavement or bioretention. Not a whole lot of the campus, but the entire campus is not really redeveloping. It's a master plan for redevelopment. So we basically looked at the proposed facilities and saw that we were able to bring, without any modification to what was planned, the proposed conditions in blue less than existing conditions discharge. We didn't get down to an undeveloped conditions. Could that be done? Yes, absolutely. But the goal was not to retrofit the entire campus. And of course, you know, retrofits can get expensive. And then we looked at maximum annual discharges as also a key to hydrology, hydromodification, and water quality. And again, we saw that we're doing better than existing conditions, which makes sense. We're adding in the LID features, not quite to undeveloped conditions, but somewhere kind of in between there. So a few final thoughts. LID serves to meet multiple goals, from aesthetics to water quality, flood control in some cases. It can also be used to increase sustainability and resiliency at campuses, and also to serve as a model for the community as a whole. School sites have special unique needs requiring customization, ranging from specifics with the children to what the funding is and what that entails. Grants can definitely help fund these projects, but they do have very specific compliance requirements, which can be challenging, but very helpful to incorporate. And then interpretive signs is an excellent tool to provide outreach, both to students and to the community at whole. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone today. Again, if you'd like a copy of my presentation, please give me your card or leave it at the back. You're also welcome to grab one of my cards, but I'll be happy to send it out to you. And with that, I'll go ahead and close and leave it for our final speaker if they're here.